Nobody expected the Apache widow to survive the afternoon. Late that afternoon, half of Tombstone had gathered in the dust outside Voss Keene's livery stable. Some came to buy feed, some came for whiskey. Most stayed because they wanted to watch a woman break. The rope around her wrists had already cut through the skin. She stumbled as two men dragged her across the street. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody spoke. The widow's dark hair hung across her face. Blood stained one sleeve of her dress. A little Apache boy cried from a doorway until his mother pulled him back inside and shut the door. The crowd wanted a thief. What most people didn't know was that Voss could have taken her straight to the sheriff. Instead, he dragged her through town first. A public accusation was harder to erase than the truth. Once enough people called someone a thief, few cared whether the charge was real. Voss Keene was happy to give them one. "She stole my horse," he shouted, "and I say she hangs before sunset." A few men cheered, others looked away. The widow said nothing. That silence seemed to anger them even more. At the far end of the street, a heavy ranch wagon rolled to a stop. The driver climbed down slowly. Oren Bellwether had come to town for flour, salt, horseshoe nails, and medicine for a sick calf. Instead, he found a hanging about to begin. At 48, Orin was broader than most men in Tombstone. An old rancher near the back of the crowd narrowed his eyes. "Bellwether?" The man beside him looked over. "You know him?" The rancher nodded slowly. "Used to. That old boy can read a horse better than most men can read a newspaper." The comment spread farther through the crowd than Orin realized. His silver belly hat shaded a weathered face. A yellow bandana rested loosely around his neck. He watched without speaking. Most people saw an Apache widow. Orin saw the horse. The bay gelding stood near the stable hitch rail. Its ears were pinned back. Its sides trembled. Yet when the widow stumbled close enough, the animal stretched its neck toward her. She touched its muzzle. The horse immediately settled. Orin narrowed his eyes. That was wrong. The stolen horse does not seek comfort from the thief accused of stealing it. His gaze drifted lower, to the brand. At first glance, it looked fresh. At second glance, it looked ugly. At third glance, Orin felt his stomach tighten. Someone had burned a new mark directly over an older one. He knew that trick. Years ago, he had lost cattle to the same scheme. The old brand vanished beneath fresh scars. Ownership disappeared. Truth disappeared. Men got rich. Good people got buried. What Orin did not know yet was that this horse would drag him back toward a mistake he had spent years trying to forget. Suddenly, Orin was no longer looking at a horse thief. He was looking at a lie, and the woman standing at the center of that lie had just lifted her head and looked directly at him. The look in her eyes was not fear. It was warning. Why would a woman moments away from a hanging look at Oren Bellwether as if she already knew a secret that could ruin his life? For a moment, neither of them looked away. The crowd kept shouting. The rope was still around the widow's wrists. Dust drifted through the street. But Orin could not shake the feeling that she recognized him. That made no sense. He had never seen her before. Voss Keene stepped forward and grabbed the rope again. "Looks like she's finally found someone willing to stare at her," he said, drawing a few laughs from the crowd. The widow lowered her eyes. The horse beside her stamped nervously. Orin took one slow step toward the stable, then another. People noticed. When a man Orin's size started moving with purpose, folks usually paid attention. Voss noticed too. "You got business here, Bellwether?" Orin stopped near the horse. Instead of answering, he reached out and ran his hand along the animal's flank. The gelding stood perfectly still. A rancher could learn a lot from a horse, more than most people realized. He looked again at the burned brand. The work was sloppy, rushed, done by someone confident nobody would question it. Orin finally glanced up. "How long have you owned this horse?" The smile on Voss's face faded just a little. "Long enough." That was not an answer. Several men in the crowd shifted their weight. They had heard enough cattle disputes to know the difference. Orin scratched his beard. "Funny thing," he pointed toward the horse. "That animal seems mighty comfortable around the woman you say stole it." Nobody laughed this time. The widow remained silent. Voss quickly recovered. "You calling me a liar?" "No," Orin shrugged. "I'm saying horses don't lie much." For the first time that afternoon, a few people in the crowd started wondering whether they had been watching the wrong person all along. A few older ranchers near the back exchanged looks. They understood exactly what he meant. The crowd's mood changed. Not completely, just enough. Enough for doubt to creep in. And doubt was dangerous for men like Voss Keen. He stepped closer. "You planning to take her side?" Orin looked around the street, at the faces watching, at the men eager for entertainment, at the woman standing alone with blood on her wrists. Then he did something nobody expected. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat. The sound of coins settling together seemed strangely loud. Even the crowd went quiet. Voss's eyes dropped toward the pouch. Money always got attention in Tombstone, especially when it appeared at the exact moment a hanging was about to begin. Orin placed the pouch on a barrel between them. "I'll cover the claim." The silence that followed felt heavier than the Arizona heat. Several mouths fell open. One man actually removed his hat just to make sure he had heard correctly. The widow finally looked up. This time there was surprise in her eyes. Not gratitude, surprise. Voss stared at the pouch, then at Orin, then back at the pouch. He wanted the money. But suddenly something else seemed to worry him more, because for the first time that afternoon, Voss Keen looked afraid. And Orin was about to find out why. Voss Keen had spent years acting like the most confident man in Tombstone. Men trusted him with horses. Travelers rented animals from him. New settlers often stopped at his stable before they went anywhere else. A man like that did not scare easily. Yet the moment Orin placed that pouch of coins on the barrel, something changed behind Voss's eyes. Not anger, not surprise. Fear. The kind that appears when a person realizes a situation is slipping out of his control. The crowd sensed it too. People leaned closer. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Voss cleared his throat. "You got no business sticking your nose into this." Orin rested one hand on the saddle horn of the bay gelding. "Maybe not. Then take your supplies and head home." For a few seconds, neither man moved. The widow watched quietly. The horse flicked an ear toward her. Then Orin pushed the pouch forward. "Take the money." The words landed hard, not because of the amount, because everyone understood what they meant. The public humiliation was over, at least for now. Voss hesitated. If he refused, people would start asking questions. If he accepted, the woman walked away. Either choice created problems. Finally, he snatched the pouch. The crowd released a collective breath. A few disappointed faces appeared immediately. Some folks had come hoping to witness a hanging. Instead, they got an argument about a horse. Funny how quickly people lose interest when cruelty becomes less entertaining. The rope was removed from the widow's wrist. Red marks circled her skin. She rubbed them slowly, but never thanked Orin. That struck him as odd. Most people would have. Instead, she stared at him with the same unsettling expression as before, as if she knew something he didn't. Before we continue, take a moment to settle in with your coffee, or simply sit back and enjoy the ride through this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from today and what you think you would have done if you were standing in that dusty street. And if you enjoy stories about courage, dignity, and ordinary people facing hard choices, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes a small act of decency can matter more than a fast draw. What nobody in Tombstone realized was that the most dangerous part of the story had not even begun. The crowd slowly drifted away. Voss disappeared into the stable without another word. That alone bothered Orin. Men like Voss usually demanded the last word. The widow finally stepped closer. Her voice was calm, almost calm enough to be frightening. "You should have left me there." Orin frowned. Most folks would call this a rescue. She shook her head. "No." Her eyes moved to the yellow bandana around his neck, then to the scar across his hand, then to the ranch name painted on the wagon. The color slowly drained from her face. "My husband told me about a rancher with a yellow bandana. He said the man carried a scar across his right hand and drove a wagon marked Bellwether Ranch." Orin felt a chill he could not explain. She swallowed. "He said if I ever saw that man, it meant the past had finally caught up with him." Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "You didn't save me." She looked directly into his eyes. "You just bought your own death. My husband warned me this day might come." The fear in her eyes was not for herself. That was what unsettled Orin most. Before Orin could answer, he noticed two men step out of the stable office. Neither looked at the widow. Both looked at him. That bothered him more than the warning. Orin simply stared at her. Most men would have laughed. Some would have walked away. A few might have taken the warning seriously. Orin did none of those things. He had lived long enough to know that people rarely spoke like that without a reason. The widow's eyes were steady. There was no panic in them, no attempt to frighten him. That made her words harder to ignore. "You know my name?" Orin asked. She looked toward the stable. The large doors were closed now, but she kept watching them as if danger still stood behind them. "I know enough." That was all she said. A warm wind pushed dust across the street. The afternoon crowd had mostly disappeared, but Orin noticed something that bothered him. Several men remained near the stable. Not customers, not ranchers, watchers. They pretended to be busy while keeping an eye on the widow and on him. Orin followed her gaze. "You afraid of Keen?" A faint smile crossed her face. It was not the answer he expected. "Keen is afraid of someone else." That got his attention. Powerful men usually feared only two things: the law or the truth. Orin picked up the sack of flour he had purchased earlier and loaded it into his wagon. The widow still hadn't moved. The red marks around her wrists looked worse now. Years of ranch work had taught Orin something simple. A wounded horse needed rest. A wounded person needed the same. "You got somewhere to go?" She hesitated. "No." The answer came quietly, not dramatic, not self-pitying, just honest. Orin nodded toward the wagon. "Then climb in." She studied him carefully, almost as if she were measuring the risk. That made him chuckle. "Ma'am, if I planned to cause trouble, I wouldn't have spent good money first." For the first time, the corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. A few minutes later, they were rolling south out of Tombstone. As they passed the edge of town, Orin glanced back. A rider stood outside Voss Keen's stable, watching, not moving, just watching them leave. The rider disappeared a moment later, but Orin did not forget him. Neither spoke much. Twice Orin caught himself checking the road behind them. Twice he saw nothing. That somehow worried him more. The wagon wheels rattled over the dry road. The sun hung low over the Arizona hills. Orin kept expecting her to explain the warning. She never did. Instead, she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Nearly an hour passed before she finally broke the silence. "My husband used to talk about a rancher." Orin glanced at her. She was looking straight ahead. "He said one day that rancher would have to choose between his land and his conscience." The words hit harder than she could have known, because Orin already remembered a time in his life when he had made exactly that choice. And before sunset, he was about to learn how much that old decision was going to cost him. The rest of the ride passed beneath a sky turning gold over the Arizona plains. Orin did not ask another question. He had learned long ago that some truths arrived faster when left alone. By the time they reached his ranch near the San Pedro River, the sun was touching the horizon. The cattle were quiet. The horses stood near the fence line. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The widow noticed it too. "You expecting company?" Orin shook his head. "No." But something felt wrong. A rancher spends enough years on the same land, and he starts noticing small things. A gate sitting slightly open. A horse standing where it shouldn't. Birds suddenly absent from a familiar tree. The front gate was open. A strange feeling settled in Orin's stomach. Someone had been here, and they wanted him to know it. Orin knew he had closed it before leaving that morning. His stomach tightened. He climbed down from the wagon and rested a hand near his revolver. Not drawing it, just reminding himself it was there. The widow stepped down beside him. For a few seconds, neither moved. Then Orin spotted a folded piece of paper wedged beneath a rock near the porch. Someone had left it recently. The paper was still clean. He picked it up. There were only a few words written on it. "Looking for the widow. We'll be back." No signature, no explanation. None needed. The widow closed her eyes, almost as if she had expected this. Orin looked at her. "Who are they?" For the first time since leaving Tombstone, she reached inside her coat. Orin tensed. Instead of a weapon, she pulled out a small leather pouch. Old, weathered, carefully tied shut. She held it for a moment before placing it in his hands. "It started because of this." Orin loosened the cord. Inside were folded papers. Several pages listed horses reported stolen across 3 counties. Others showed altered brands and forged ownership records. The same names appeared again and again. Ranchers ruined, Apache families blamed, land changing hands after every accusation, and one name that immediately froze him in place: Captain Rusk Merriweather. The same officer who had hired Orin years ago to haul supplies for a military operation he had spent half his life trying not to think about. A memory he had buried deep. A memory that suddenly did not seem buried at all. The widow watched his face. "My husband found the records." Orin slowly looked up. She continued, "He died because of them." For the first time, Orin wondered how many other people had paid for those secrets with their lives. The evening wind moved through the grass. Neither spoke. The silence said enough. Far away, a horse whinnied, then another. Orin walked to the porch and sat heavily in his chair. For years, he had convinced himself that staying quiet had protected his ranch, protected his future, protected the life he built. Now the past was sitting in his hands, and it had finally found its way home. As darkness settled across the plains, a lone rider appeared on a distant ridge overlooking the ranch. He remained there only a moment, watching, waiting. Then he turned his horse and disappeared into the fading light. The widow saw him. Orin saw him too. Neither needed to say a word, because they both understood the same thing. Voss Keen had been only the beginning. Ain't that a hell of a thing? A horse knew the truth, and a whole town didn't. Now I've seen stubborn mules, half-blind cattle, and more than a few fools who couldn't pour piss out of a boot with the instructions written on the heel. But it still amazes me how fast folks will swallow a lie once enough people are feeding it to them. Pleasant Valley taught that lesson in blood. Back in the 1880s, men were squabbling over cattle, water, grazing land, and stock brands. One outfit was handing out promises worth 50 head of cattle for testimony. 50 head. That's enough beef to make a man's conscience mighty flexible. Pretty soon, running irons were burning over old brands, paperwork was changing ownership, and everybody had a story about who the rustlers were. Funny thing is, when the dust finally settled, plenty of men were dead, and not a single soul paid for it in court. That ain't frontier justice. That's frontier politics. I've always figured a running iron can steal a cow, but a slick talker with a stack of papers can steal a ranch, a reputation, and sometimes a man's grave besides. And that's a whole lot harder to get back.